Bethlehem, I have chosen one of his sons to be king. But Samuel said, how can I go? Saul will hear about it and kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I will indicate. So Samuel goes down and he meets up with Jesse. And the Lord said to Samuel, consecrate the one that I shall show to you. And when they arrived, Samuel saw Eli, and he thought, surely the Lord anointed stands before me. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things a man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass before Samuel. But Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. Jesse had Shammah call pass, but Samuel said, nor has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. So he asked Jesse, are these all of your sons? There is still the youngest, Jesse answered, but he's tending the sheep. And Samuel said, send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. And so he sent for him and brought him in. He was ruddy with a fine appearance and handsome features. And the Lord said, rise and anoint him. He is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. And Samuel went on to Ramah. The Lord had him anoint David. And I want to call your attention again to verse 7, which says, the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things a man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Amen. And you know, there the Lord had David anointed to be the king of Israel. Now, David wasn't a perfect person. I think you all will remember the stories that follow on. David committing adultery. David having Uriah sent off to war, knowing that he would be killed so that he could take Uriah's wife to be his wife. And the Lord does not look for perfect people. And you know, there really has never been a perfect man, perfect person, except one, and they crucified him. So what I'm trying to say to you today is that when the Lord has us do something, he's not looking for a perfect person. He's looking at your heart and what's within you. The Lord may call you to do something, no matter who you are, what your status in life is, or where you are. Doesn't matter what your color is either. I want to just share with you a few things about my life. And what I'm going to tell you, I want you to know up front, I'm not bragging. Didn't come here to brag today. I came here to tell you how the Lord has used me to help my fellow man. You know, I'm a Christian. I've always been a Christian as far back as I can remember. As a child, I grew up in the church. I am told, I don't remember this, but I am told that I was baptized as a child. I was baptized again as an adult. At some point in my life, I just felt like I needed to be baptized, and I was baptized as an adult by immersion. And that had a special meaning for me because it was kind of a renewal of my Christian life. You know, and I say to you that I've always been a Christian. I've always been a good Christian, like a lot of every people. You know, I've stumbled a time or two, but I'm thankful that our God, when you stumble, He'll pick you up and help you and keep you, move you on the right way. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, on June the 26th, 1933. That makes me 90 years old last June. I was born at home. My mom used a midwife. Back in those days, ladies didn't go to the hospitals. Doctors came to your home. I can remember our family doctor was Dr. Osborne. And we never went to Dr. Osborne's office. He always came to the house with his little black bag. He had a stethoscope, and I don't know what other tools he might have had in there, but no matter what your ailment might have been, he always listened to your heart and carried that stethoscope around in the bag, and that made him a very important person. I can remember growing up as a child. I grew up in Jim Crow, South Georgia. I can remember I was born at home on the corner of Dargan Place and Westview Drive. Westview Drive is now known as Martin Luther King Boulevard. The house I was born in has been raised, and that is now an exit on I-20 right through the front yard. But on the front porch of that house, we had a swing. I remember sitting in that swing, swinging back and forth. Across the road, there was a long, open red field. Some good Georgia red dirt there. It had to be probably a half mile across that field. There was a stretch there between the white community and the black community. At the very far side of that field, there was a cliff that dropped down. And then down below the cliff was the black community. I can remember sitting in that swing on my front porch, watching the Ku Klux Klan burn a cross at the top of that cliff. I can remember we moved from that house out into, my dad bought an acreage outside of Atlanta. He and two of my cousins built us a home out there. I can remember the chain gang working the road in front of my house, with prisoners chained together, mostly black. And I just remember these things growing up as a kid in South Georgia. I lived there with my family. My folks had an unusual family. They had 2 children, and it waited 10 years and had 3 more. And I was the middle of the last 3. When I was 6 years old, my mom passed away. She had pneumonia, and we had not yet discovered penicillin. And so we left our home in Atlanta, and we moved out to Conyers, southeast of Atlanta, to live with an aunt and uncle. Aunt and uncle took us in. My dad had a job at the United States Post Office in downtown Atlanta, and he supported us, and he came to Conyers every weekend to visit with us. We lived in a house that had no water, no electricity. We used an outhouse. We took a bath once a week. We had a number 2 wash tub that we filled with water. It would sit in the sun all day and get warm, and we'd have a little warm water to take a bath. I remember when it was hog killing time. Kill the hog and hang it in the tree with a single tree between its legs. Neighbors would all come, help clean the hog and cut it up and put it away. My uncle had a smokehouse for the hams, had a big salt box on the back porch where he put the meat in the salt to cure it. Had a garden. We lived on what we grew. Groceries, didn't have Winn-Dixie or Harris Teeter back in those days. And you just, whatever you could grow in the garden is what you ate. You raised your own meat, had cows for milk. I remember my uncle would milk the cows, and he would put the milk in a jug and put the jug in a bucket and drop it into the well to keep it cool. That was a refrigerator. I remember keeping a big churn of milk sitting by the stove in the kitchen so that it would clabber and churn and make butter. And this was how I learned early America was built. I remember when the rural electrification system came through and brought electricity. We had one wire coming down from the ceiling with a light bulb screwed into the socket. We had electricity. That was the only electricity in the house, but we had electricity. My dad eventually bought a pump, put a pump in the well. We had running water. We eventually put a bathtub and a toilet inside the house. Didn't have to go running to the outhouse anymore. But that was the way I grew up. My uncle had sharecroppers. Sometimes they were African Americans, sometimes they were white. When I grew up, African American children were my playmates. And if I happened to be at their house at mealtime, they fed me. And I grew up in an environment where I probably am the least prejudiced person you will ever meet, because that was the way I grew up. Now, so that was not society at the time. I can remember we would, my cousin was a good deal older than we were. She lived there with us, and she ran a little store on the back porch, just carrying staples like flour and some things that you had to get from the store. And no one had any money. The medium of exchange was eggs. And depending on how plentiful the eggs were, an egg was worth a nickel. Sometimes if the hens were good to us, we had a lot of eggs, and there were 2 for a nickel. And my cousin Willie Sue would deal with the neighbors and give out things from the store and collect eggs. And every Saturday my uncle would go to town and take the eggs to the store in town and exchange them for goods to bring home and replenish the store. I can remember as a kid, 6, 7 years old, when we walked down the street in Conyers, if a black person came toward us, they would step off into the gutter until we passed. And then they'd get back on the sidewalk and go their way. You go into any public building, there were 2 water fountains, there were 2 restrooms, had signs on the door, white, black. And that was a way of life in which I grew up. It kind of was remarkable to me when I was older and I went back into that environment. And another cousin who was about the same age as I am was working for Georgia Power Company as a buyer. She bought parts, electrical parts, from wherever Georgia Power got their parts from. And she was very angry. And I was talking to her, I said, Miriam, what are you mad about? I was home on leave from the Air Force when I was talking to her about this, and she says, this girl next to me just got promoted, and she's making the same amount of money as I am. I said, well, what does she do? Well, she's a buyer. I said, does she do the same work that you do? Well, yes. Well, then why shouldn't she get paid as much as you do? She's black. That was simply the culture in which I grew up in Georgia. Fast forward to 1980, I'm back in this part of the country. I was over in Valdosta I was in court, and I came home. It was just about dusk. On the highway between Waycross and Brunswick, I think that 84, the one we came over on. After you cross, I-95, of course, was not there at the time, but as you go on beyond it, this was a 2-lane road. This is in the 80s. And I come upon a large number of pickup trucks parked on both sides of the road. A bunch of people off in the field out here. You could see probably 50, 60 guys out there. And I just kind of got out in the center of the road and eased on through there and got home. And a few days later, I ran into my nephew, who was the chief of police in Glenn County. And I said, Carl, what's going on out here? And I told him, and he said, Doug, that's the Klan. Still in 1980s, the Klan. But let's go back to where I was as a kid. We lived with my aunt for a number of years in the country, and then we moved back to Atlanta. My dad hired a housekeeper time or two. We moved to Florida for a while. My older sister got married. She had a little boy. She lost her husband in France in World War II. And she was keeping house for us. And then my brother, who was a year and a half older than me, and my sister, a year and a half younger, the three of us always managed to stay together. And we ended up going to a boarding school in Toccoa, Georgia. At that time it was called Toccoa Falls Institute. It's now called Toccoa College. It was a Christian Missionary Alliance school, and most of the kids there, their parents were missionaries somewhere, and we were all boarding there. And I went there. I guess I was a junior in high school at the time we went there. I played a trumpet in the high school band, played basketball. It was a fun place to be, with a couple of exceptions. Every kid there had to work. We had a job. They had a farm. I had a few animals that we kept. And I ended up working in the kitchen. I've washed more dishes than you can imagine, pots and pans. And but there was a benefit of working in the kitchen, because the girls waited tables, and the girls had to come in the kitchen to get the food. And I got to flirt with all the girls. So I had a good time, except for the fact that the school had extremely strict rules. We had an hour in the evening, 1 hour, that we called courting time. And you could sit with your girlfriend, but you could not touch. You couldn't hold hands. And heaven forbid if you ever kissed. More demerits than you can imagine. And so, I'm there as a teenager, and that got to be too strict for me, and I simply left. I told my dad, "I'm sorry, I can't do this." I called a Greyhound bus, and I came to Brunswick, Georgia. My older brother, one of the first two that were born, lived on St. Simon's Island, and I went knocking on his door. And St. Simon's has been my home since 1949. In June of 1950, I joined the Air National Guard on St. Simon's Island with a little encouragement from my older brother. And they were forming a unit there, and it required 40 members in order to be federally recognized as an Air Guard unit and be able to get equipment from the federal government. I was the 40th member with the help of my brother. I think he had my arm twisted behind my back. At any rate, I was a senior at Glenn Academy in the class of 51, and the Air Guard unit got called to active duty in January of 1951. So I left with the Guard to go on active duty in the Korean War without graduating. We were sent to Nashville, Tennessee for a year, and then we were sent to French Morocco, to Casablanca, where we built air bases from which we flew the B-47 during the Cold War. And incidentally, a classmate of mine at Glenn Academy, Bobby Torres, was a B-47 pilot and flew out of those air bases that we built over there. I decided that I liked the Air Force, and I re-enlisted. I had been in Oklahoma a while before that. My sister was living out there, and I'd gone to school out there about a year. When I re-enlisted, I got a re-enlistment leave. For 30 days, I came home from French Morocco, and I married a high school sweetheart from Oklahoma. Went back to French Morocco, saved my money, and I brought her over there on the Queen Mary. She landed in Gibraltar, and I went up there and picked her up. She came back with me to live in Casablanca. And our first child, Debbie, who you met, was born in Casablanca. And that I came home from there, 1953, stationed briefly in Alexandria, Louisiana. And then I got an opportunity to be assigned to Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma City, which was my wife's home. So we took advantage of that opportunity and moved to Oklahoma. And I was assigned then to an organization in the Air Force known as the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. That unit is an investigative unit with its headquarters in Washington, D.C. It has offices all over the world. It's a plainclothes operation. It's a little bit like James Bond without the beautiful women. It's just hard counterintelligence work. I was there at Tinker for a few months, and I was fortunate enough to go to Officer Candidate School. Got commissioned as a second lieutenant. From there, I went to Chicago, then did a year in Korea, came back to Tinker, 2 different assignments in Texas, and went to Chinese language school for a year. I did a total immersion program, which means that after the first day you're in class, you speak no English. It's only Chinese. And it's like going to kindergarten again. This is Jack. This is Jill. Jack ran up the hill. You know the routine, and that's the way we learned Chinese. But that's all we could do. Every day you got new words. We did this for a year, a solid year. When I graduated from that class, I could read and write 4,000 Chinese characters. Now, that's not very many when you stop and think that there are 40,000 in total. But I had kind of an elementary school level from reading and writing, but I could speak it pretty well. I still can speak it pretty well. I sometimes dream in Chinese. And I used to have fun with June. I didn't know, I wouldn't realize it, but sometimes she'd ask me a question and I would answer her in Chinese, and she'd say, "What did you say?" And I still have a little fun when I go to Chinese restaurants. I get to talk a little bit to some of the waitresses and the people that work there. And I spent 4 years in Taiwan during the Vietnam War. I was stationed there with a C-130 outfit, which was flying support for Vietnam War, and they were all over the Far East, and I was everywhere over there as well. And I had another friend who was stationed there at the same time. He had 5 children. I had 4, and we were all together there in Taipei. And he came home. I was over there from 66 to 71. He came home in about 68. I maintained contact with him, visited him and his wife a couple times in San Francisco. But I have not seen those kids since they came home. I discovered that one of them is retired and living in Austin, Texas. Next Wednesday, I'm going to fly to Dallas going to spend a week in Fort Worth with Debbie. And then I'm going to go down to Austin and spend a week with Terry. And this young man is living in Austin. I found him on Facebook. We have exchanged emails and cell phone numbers. So I'm going to have a reunion with him. I haven't seen him for 55 years.
Wow.
So that's going to be a wonderful experience.
Yes.
After leaving the Air Force, and by the way, I went into the Air Force as a private. They now call them Airman Basic in the Air Force. I got a commission and I retired as a lieutenant colonel. My last job, I was the chief inspector for the organization, and I traveled all over the world inspecting the units to make sure they were complying with the proper procedures and security matters. I retired from the Air Force in 1974 after 24 years of service, and then I went to law school. I had been stationed in Oklahoma 3 times, and I qualified as a resident student, and resident rates were, at that time, $9 a semester hour. Can you imagine what that is today? At any rate, I went to law school there. My father passed on while I was in law school, and I came home to stay in 1980 after law school to take care of my stepmom. She was living up in Conyers at the time and in an assisted living facility. My dad left me as the executor of his estate, so I came home to take care of Mom, and I took care of her until 1995 she passed. I would go visit her there. I'd bring her to the island to visit. I took care of her bills and managed the estate for her. And I started practicing law. I kind of got into working with indigent people in law school. University of Oklahoma Law School runs the legal aid office for the county in which they're located. And beginning in the second year of law school, we had what they call an intern program. And I got involved in that, and we could go to court along with a lawyer who was one of the professors. He was our supervisor, but I started in my second year of law school to get some courtroom experience representing the indigent people. We also had a program that was called the El Reno Prison Project. Just west of Oklahoma City, there's a little town called El Reno, in which there is a federal prison. And we would represent the inmates in the federal prison in what we call post-conviction relief. And we helped a few of them, guys in there for 20 years or whatever, and we helped some of them get divorces so their wife could get on with her life, because guy's going to be gone 20 years. It's kind of hard to maintain a relationship when he's in jail, and so we did some of that work. And then one of the most interesting cases I had as an intern, I got appointed to a case to represent an inmate before the parole board. And he had been in 5 years, and he was eligible for parole. He had gotten, I think he had a couple of write-ups, but there were nothing serious, and he had a pretty clean record. His biggest problem, he had a lot of problems dealing with the guards because he was a homosexual. And they hated him because of this. And this guy was open I mean, this was during the time when, we didn't have parades like they now have in New York and different places, gay pride and all that stuff. So most of these guys were in the closet, but this one was wide open. And the guards simply didn't want him to get paroled. They wanted to keep him in there and punish him. And it just became extremely obvious during the parole hearing. And so we heard all of the evidence, and I got up and made my argument, and I told the parole board, I said, it is clearly obvious why these guards dislike this person. And I said, I don't care what your personal feelings are. This man is not in jail for being a homosexual. He's in jail for robbing a bank. And he has served his time. He has substantially behaved. And he deserves to be paroled. And they said, well, thank you, Mr. Alexander. We were all excused and went our happy way. Parole board issued their findings, and they granted him parole. And so I got exposed to trying to help people that I felt were in a position that they were not able to hire a lawyer. And I guess the good Lord called me. And I came back here, and I had passed the bar in Oklahoma, but I had to take the bar exam again when I came here. So while I was studying to take the Georgia bar, I went to work for Georgia Legal Services in Brunswick. And I couldn't go to court here because I wasn't licensed here, but I did interviews, and I'd draw pleadings and do things around the office. And so I got more exposure to helping the indigent folks there. I passed the bar, fortunately, the first time I took it here, and then Legal Services hired me to be a staff lawyer. They started paying me a little. And I went on to become the managing attorney for the Brunswick office for a number of years. And then when I left there, I became a member of the board of directors for the statewide office. And I have always been involved in some civil rights cases. I sued Glenn County 2 or 3 times over their jail conditions. The jail, when I came here, the jail in Brunswick had been built to house 60 inmates, and they were housing 120. They were sleeping on the floor. There was a steel table in there where they could sit down to eat. They were sleeping on top of the table, underneath the table. It was absolutely horrible. And as a result of my lawsuit, they built a new jail. They hired a professional jailer who had been trained. Then some years right by, the jail was built. The plans initially was built such that you could duplicate it with a second floor and just double the capacity. But the county commissioners decided that they were going to save a little money, so they removed the steel from the building, the original building. They were going to save money. They took the steel pilings out of it, just never installed them, so that when it came time to build the second floor, the first floor would not support it. So they tried to buy the lot across the street from it, and they were going to get the city to close the street and just extend the jail that way. And the city refused to close the street. And then they were going to build up over the street. And I filed a lawsuit along with a co-counsel, and we blocked them from building that jail at that location. And they built a new jail about 1.5 miles away, which is in far better location, and they've got lots of room where they can expand it whenever they need to. And the city lot that they were going to build the jail on is now a memorial park for the veterans who have paid the supreme sacrifice for Glenn County and World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East. It's a very nice park there. And in about 2013, I decided that I was going to retire from practicing law, and I surrendered my license. I continued to do a little work through Georgia Legal Services. I could, as long as I'm doing it through them, I could do a little work pro bono, and I was doing work at the Well, which is a homeless center there. It's not a shelter, but it's a daytime center where they can get resources. And I had a good relationship going there, and I'll tell you about a couple of cases from there. But I want to tell you about one case in particular, because this one is probably one of the most shining examples of how the good Lord has used me. I got appointed by Judge Blinn Taylor to represent a young black woman who was in jail in Brunswick. She was in jail basically for a probation violation, but she had been convicted earlier of a credit card fraud, and she had stolen a credit card and used the credit card to get money to support a drug habit. So I go over to the jail to see her and let her know that I'm your new lawyer. And here I find a young girl who is maybe 19 years old. She has one child who is with its father, and she's pregnant in our jail. So I went to see the judge, and I told him, I said, "Judge, we don't need a pregnant woman in our jail." I said, "Who is going to provide prenatal care? And heaven forbid, what if she had a miscarriage in our jail?" And I had found a place up in Statesboro. It was a home. It was an amazing connection, because it was a home for unwed females who were pregnant, who had drug problems. And I had talked to these people, and they had agreed to take her. And I convinced the judge that we really didn't need her in jail, and then so we got an order entered modifying her probation so that if she went to this program and completed it, probation be dismissed. She could go there and stay. She would get prenatal care. She could stay until the child had its 6-week checkup, and then she had to leave. So she agreed to go, and the judge agreed for her to go, and I put her in my car and took her to Statesboro. Checked her in up there. It was a lockdown facility. She couldn't leave, but it was quite a nice facility, and they had all of the things that she needed. I go back to Brunswick. I'm, finished, got this job done. About 2 weeks later, my secretary comes in and said, Mr. Alexander, there's a young lady out here crying that says she really needs to talk to you. She doesn't have an appointment. I said, bring her in. Same little girl. I said, what are you doing here? I can't stand that place. It's too strict. Got too many rules. I said, well, you got two choices. You can go there, or you can go back to jail. So that's the only thing we've got going. She said, they won't take me back. I said, why is that? She says, I was awful. She said, I use a lot of four-letter words with those people. They're not going to let me back in there. I said, you let me talk to him. And I got on the phone and begged and pleaded with him. Got him to take her back. Put her in my car, took her back to Statesboro. Went about my happy business and sort of got her out of my mind. Secretary comes in and says, Mr. Alexander, there's a young lady out here in the waiting room with her baby. She says, she'd like to see you. She came in. She had her baby, had its 6 weeks checkup. She's back in Brunswick. Says, Mr. Doug, I got me an apartment over here in the project. I have a job working for I'm over here at the health department. I got a job working as a receptionist. I'm good to go. I said, good for you. Glad to see you. She goes away, and a few weeks later she comes back and says, Mr. Doug, I gotta have some wheels. There's no public transportation in Brunswick. Anywhere I go, I gotta pay somebody to take me. And I can't afford that. And she said, I gotta figure out a way to get a car. But she says, my credit is so bad, nobody will lend me any money. I told her that, we can, anybody can post 100 words on your credit report. You're entitled by law to do that. I said, let me help you write 100 words. So we wrote her story and condensed it down to 100 words, posted it on her credit report. Glenn Teachers Credit Union loaned her the money to buy a car. She got a little old car, and then she's able to get around, take her baby where it needed to go, and all of that sort of thing. And so, rocking along, pretty soon here she is again in my office. Mr. Doug, she says, I can't stand living in the project. She said, you would not believe what goes on in the project, and I can't live like that. I'm not going to raise my child in that environment. And I said, well, Mary, I don't blame you for that. What are you going to do? She says, well, I found this little house. It's out in Arco. That's North Brunswick. And she said, I want you to close it for me. I said, how are you going to pay for it? She said, credit union loaned me the money. She had been making regular payments on her car, and she had built up good enough credit. They loaned her the money to buy this little shotgun house. So I went out and looked at it, and I said, yeah, that's okay. It's worth the money that you're paying for it. So we closed on it, and she moved in. A few months rock on, she comes back again. She said, I quit my job, and I'm keeping children. I said, what do you mean you're keeping children? She said, well, she says, I got a cyclone fence around my yard. I got a little bit of playground equipment. They're safe. And she said, I'm keeping children. I said, well, how many are you keeping? She says, I got 6. But she says, I want to keep more. And she said, I found this place that I want to buy that I can keep a lot more. And I said, well, let's go look at it. It was a dump. I said, no, you don't want to buy this place. How much you going to pay for it? Some outrageous price. I said, no, it's not worth it. She says, but look across the street. She said, those girls who live in the project right there need a safe place for their children to stay so they can go to work. And this is right here where they live. She said, I want to buy this place. Credit union got unlimited money. She'd already been to see them. I said, well, why don't we go talk to the man who's buying it, who's selling it to you? So we talked to him, and I argued with him, and I got him to knock about 10 grand off the price. We closed on it. The credit union loaned her 100% plus $10,000 to fix it up. She put a cyclone fence around it, bought some playground equipment, painted it, put smoke detectors, a sprinkler system in it, new heating and air. I mean, fix it up right. Today, this woman is keeping about 30 children. She came to church, in my church last week. She's a fine Christian woman, and she is serving God by helping people in these young girls that live in the project there in Brunswick have a safe place for their kids while they go to work. And you know, she has just been kind of floating in and out of my life for a number of years now, a large number of years, since the 80s. And she's a dear friend. She's a Christian. She's a strong Christian. She's very active in her church. She's helping people. And I'm going to give you 2 more examples, and then I'm going to say, okay, man, you've heard it. I've got a disabled Navy veteran came to see me at the well. He said, Mr. Alexander, he says, I need to get my license back. And I said, well, what's your problem? He says, well, I've got a DUI. And I said, well, tell me about it. He says, well, it's about 10 years old. And he said, I got a couple of warrants pending for failing to appear, because he said, I never got notice. You know, I'm living on the street. I'm homeless. And I said, well, let me check it out. I need to go to the courthouse and pull the file and just see exactly what the deal is. So I go over and I get a copy of the citation when he was arrested. And I told him to meet me back there in about a week. And so I had a friend who at the time he was a chief jailer, and he then became the chief deputy for the Glenn County Sheriff, and he and I had become good friends over the years through the jail litigation, and I called him up and told him, I said, I'm trying to help this homeless guy. I said, I know he's got a DUI pending and a couple of warrants for failing to appear, but I said, how about running his name in the system and tell me if he's got anything else pending. I want to try to clean him up, and if we're going to get him where he can get to go, let's get rid of everything he's got pending. He said, okay, and he called me back in about 20 minutes. He says, Doug, we have this man in custody. I said, for what? Public drunk. He had been picked up at the Manor House, which is a food kitchen there in Brunswick, and he had been absolutely blind drunk, behaving outrageously. Police officer picked him up. Anytime the person is in that kind of a condition, they have to take them to the emergency room and have a doctor check them before they put them in jail, so they did that. And the police are kind of taunting him at the jail, and he spit in one of them's face. Well, the doctor said he's okay, so they lock him up. He's in the judge and the rule over there. You cannot hold a person in jail who has no money, no way to make bond. So it's about 3 days. They keep him at least that long to sober him up. They turn him loose on his own recognizance. And so he gets out, comes back over to see me, and I'm looking at him and I said, what were you doing when you got this DUI? He says, I was riding a bicycle. And I had the citation in front of me, and I says, well, it says here on the ticket, the make of the automobile that you were driving was a Huffy. So clearly he had been arrested and given a DUI ticket when he was riding a bicycle. So I said, why don't we we need to go out to the driver license place and check your driver record to see what exactly is pending and what do we need to do to clean it up. So we go out there and look at that, and sure enough, that's exactly what it is. They got him for DUI driving a Huffy, and got two blocks against him there for failing to appear. And then he had a third one for failing to pay child support. The third of the child support was, the child was well over 18 years old now, and it was back child support that was due from some years ago, but he was still having to pay it because DFACS had paid the mother, and he was paying DFACS back. So turns out they were deducting $50 a month from his disability check. So I called the child support receiver's office, and I said, listen, I said, the man is paying you. Release the hold on his license. And they said, Mr. Alexander, you're correct. We release it. So they released that one. When we finished our visit to the driver license bureau, it was about noon. So I took him to lunch. We're sitting there eating lunch, and I'm talking to him, and I'm telling him, I said, you can't live like this. You need to do something to get some help. We talked on a little bit, and he began to cry. And he acknowledged he needed some help. He knew he couldn't do it by himself. And I says, well, why don't we get you some help? And we sat there and talked some more, and we had a little prayer meeting, prayed a little bit, both of us did. And I convinced him he needed some help, and we went over to Gateway, which is a mental health facility there in Brunswick, and he self-admitted himself to Gateway. He's going to be in there 5 days. So I got on the phone and I found a place for him in Valdosta. It's a hospital over there that had a 28-day program for alcoholics. And he agreed to go there. They agreed to accept him. People at Gateway transported him to Valdosta. He's over there 28 days. He and I are communicating a little bit in the meantime, and he graduates from that program. I got him enrolled in a 6 months outpatient program in Brunswick at a place called Doc's Place. I went to Valdosta and picked him up, and I brought him back. Got him enrolled there at Doc's Place. And then while he's there, I decided I would go to court and see if I couldn't get the judge to let me clean up this DUI, and talked to the prosecutor, and they were agreeable. We're going to reduce the DUI down to a public drunk charge. Give him credit for time served. He'd been in jail 3 days at the time. And so with that agreement, we go in front of the judge, and I told the judge is holding the citation in front of him, and I said, Judge, the police officers were very busy on this particular day, and I said they arrested this man, gave him a DUI ticket when he was riding a bicycle. And the judge just kind of rolled his eyes, and he agreed to reduce that down to a public drunk and give him credit for time served. That got rid of the DUI. It got rid of the 2 failure to appears. It got rid of that. And then I said, now, Judge, he recently was in jail for 3 days on a public drunk charge, and I want to plead him guilty to that. Ask you to give him credit for time served, and let's dismiss that one as well. Police officer standing there, and the judge is reading the report, and he said, Mr. Alexander, I do not like people spitting in the face of my police officers. So I told him he was in this 6 months program, and I told him the whole history, and he says, well, you let him finish the 6 months program, and then you come back and you bring him with you. And I said, that's fair, Judge, we'll do that. He finished the 6 months. We go back to court. He apologized to the judge. He apologized to the police officer. He said, Judge, I know that, under the law, being drunk is not a defense, and I understand that. But he says, I fully understand also that I was drunk out of my mind. I mean, he says, I've seen the video, and he says, I absolutely was drunk. But he says, I have now been clean close to a year. And he says, and I'm working on it. We got that one taken care of. Took him back to the driver license place, passed the test, used my car, and he hadn't had a license for so long, he had to do the driving test again, so took him out and he did that. He got his license back. Brother lives over here in Brantley County. He gave him a little beat-up automobile, so now he's got wheels. He had a daughter who was a nurse, an RN at the hospital. We got her assigned as the representative payee on his his disability, so the check goes to her. We got him into a little efficiency apartment over in Brunswick. She pays his rent and his bills, makes sure everything's done timely. He has now been sober almost 7 years. And I want you to keep this man in your prayers. His name is Gil. Just remember Gil. He recently was diagnosed with stomach cancer. So it's inoperable. He's going to have to go through radiation and chemo and all of that. So please pray for Gil, because Gil is struggling. He's one of God's people, one of us. And, it's just people like this have come into my life and have given me an opportunity to be a servant of God and help him along the way. And I am extremely thankful for, I've had two, I think, rather exceptional careers, my military career and then my legal career. And most recently, I reinstated my license so that I can represent the well. They've been sued by the city trying to close them. And we're trying to defend the well and keep it open. And, the Lord has been good to me. I've seen the world. My military career, I was all over the place. And I am forever grateful. The Lord has truly been good to me. He's brought a lot of wonderful people into my life. He's given me the opportunity to know what being a Christian is all about, and to understand that when we stumble, God's going to reach down and pick us up, and he's going to say, okay, Doug, you goofed, but you get another chance. And the opportunities cross our path every day, and so many people have helped me along the way in my life, and so I am grateful for the opportunity to have paid back a little bit. And I certainly enjoy being with you guys. I don't get to come out here real often, but I enjoy it when I do come. And I want to say God bless this ministry, and God bless each and every one of you, and Merry Christmas.